So we have been looking at the American history and culture, and in particular race in America in the 18th, 19th century. This week we are going to take a look at the 20th century. Now, so far what we have seen is that race has played an integral role in the history of the United States. We learned that for some, it has meant rights, power, and privilege, while for others, it has meant abuse and exploitation. Last week, for example, we looked at the 18th and 19th century. We learned that this period was marked by harsh brutality against black, and we learned of the atrocities that was the slave trade. We also looked at the life of Mr. Frederick Douglass, who gave his personal account of being a slave, and we also read Mr. Falcon Bridges' account of what it was like to work on a slave ship and how bad those circumstances were. Closer to home, we realized that Native Americans fared no better. They also faced brutality and near extinction at the hands of whites. Their lands were stolen from them, and in the case of their children were robbed of their culture and their history. They were actually sent to schools like the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which was meant to re-educate them into white culture, and of course this would cure them of their barbaric ways and make them civilized. Now, fortunately, the 20th century saw some changes. Black soldiers had fought alongside white soldiers in the war, and when they came home, they expected to work alongside these white soldiers. Black media also started flourishing, and they would highlight the injustices that were being meted out to minorities. Black lawyers chipped away at the legal justifications for segregation, and of course there was the rise of Black Power movements that demanded rights for minorities. Out of this came leaders like Malcolm X, who advocated militant action, and persons like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who advocated nonviolent protest. Now, even though their methods were different, they all felt a sense of urgency as they realized that things had to change and could not go back to being the way they were. The 1960s was the era that saw a lot of movement. There was the civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement, the Native American empowerment movement, the gay and lesbian liberation movement. All of these and other movements advocated for rights that led to the improvements that we now see today. Now, we really have come a long way in terms of having equality for all, but there really is a lot of work to do, and we have a long way to go. We realize that we're now living in an era in 2017 when there are persons who would love for things to go back the way they were. However, we cannot allow for this to happen. As an old preacher who was a slave, was quoted as saying, "We ain't what we ought to be, we ain't what we gotta be, but thank God we ain't what we was."